Okay, well, it's 7:01, so I want to go ahead and get started and keep us on track because we have a packed a packed schedule today, and we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. We're going to and I'm just going to let it unfold as it unfolds. So, welcome to Portland Urban Beekeepers monthly member meeting. And why join the Portland Urban Beekeepers? Well, for a very small fee every year, you get a lot of benefits, and I'm just going to leave it there. You can go back and look at this later for all of the things that we have, and we're going to work on making our library online and so that you can arrange to go and pick up, see what we have, and then arrange to go and pick up library books as you need them. Our apiary is out at Green Acres. We have two hives. Bruce is our apiary manager, and Ryan McDonough has been supporting Bruce in that role. And we have two live Langstroths, and they're doing very well so far. And we're thinking, again, based on what goes on with the virus, but in June, maybe opening us back up to work parties of maybe like about 10. I know that. Probably we can do a lot of social distancing out there. And so I don't think that's going to be a problem. But just remember, even after the vaccines are out, we will still be wearing masks. Apparently, which I'm learning, you can be vaccinated and you can still transmit the virus. So for that reason, we were cautiously optimistic thinking about June. Our speaker lineup and Zoom, we will be Zooming until further notice. So we have Tom Seeley will be speaking to us next month. Chris Korick will be talking to us about keeping bees and logs. In April, Dewey Karen is going to review spring management. In May, Max Kuhn is going to talk to us about how to cage your queen for Varroa management. And he is a Organ Master Beekeeper master's level student who developed a whole frame caging device, and we have an example of this thing that he's built along with directions how to build it in our library. So when he gives this demonstration, if you're interested in building this, be sure you check out that device and the instructions. And in June, Dr. Ramesh Sagili from the University of Oregon is going to talk to us about new research findings in Varroa and Varroa management. So again, as I said, Zooming until further notice. And I just want to bring the club up to speed and let you know where we're at with this. So we are still in dialogue with the Friends of Multnomah, where we were having our meetings before on Stark Street. And we have reserved the room beginning in June, and we don't pay until we actually begin to occupy the room. So what I've done is I've put out a Zoom, a one question survey, and I've asked people to tell us what's working better for you. Do you all want to sit together in a room and have what we did before? Or are the Zoom meetings just really working for you? You can watch them when you want. You can watch them over again. So there's pluses and minuses to each format. Now, I don't know whether or not you read your email carefully enough, but every member has been sent this Zoom link. And so there's the link. And so far, we've had 27 responses, and it's going in favor of Zoom. So if you're really invested in this, if you're super, super bent one way or the other, you need to get your vote in because this poll is going to close in a couple of months. And yeah, we're going to go based off of this poll. So there's your link. It was sent to you in an email. And so far, Zoom is winning. Zoom is less expensive and more flexible. And those are just, you know which way I voted, but vote however you want. Okay. So we're having our B-School 2021, thanks to Susie Wilcox, and we will give her a big round of applause for stepping up and taking this over. She's going to be doing it a little differently. She's going to be doing a live Zoom format from 7 to 9 on these dates listed. It's going to follow the format that you see on your screen, basically like what we did last year. We feel like that one day is not enough time to learn everything you need to know about bees. And so by separating it out into the important seasons of beekeeping, that it will be something that we can go in a little bit of a deeper dive. And it will be also in conjunction with Dewey's book, honeybee biology and beekeeping. So let your friends know. We're going to start aggressively advertising probably this month. It's already on Facebook, and we have purchased 30 books. And I don't think that we capped we didn't have to cap registration this year because we're doing it on Zoom. So I mean, theoretically, we can't do more than 100 people, but right. So there you go. Let your friends know. I think it'll be a great class. Okay, so we're going to transition now into what should we be doing in our hive in the wintertime. So this is a beautiful photograph that was shared by Dewey Karen, and what are the bees doing? So we know that in January, it's a quiescent period for the bees, but they are starting to build up brood. Now, the dark line is the brood, and then your dotted line are your adult bees. So you can see that your population of adult bees is rather high, and in January, they're already beginning to build, and this is why it's so important that we feed and monitor how much honey is in the hive. Again, this is California data from the Bee Health Extension. So we might be a little bit more delayed just because the warmth of the California and the coolness up here in the Pacific Northwest. But it does just give you a general pattern and an idea of when they really start ramping up, which will be February, March. And more importantly, or as important, what are the mites doing right now? So again, this is California data from Randy Oliver, and it shows us January sort of got truncated off this graph, but you can see in February that they're not doing a whole lot. The bee population is static and hopefully beginning to expand. And we understand why there's not a lot of mites right now is because there's not a lot of brood right now. So we know that the mite phenomenon is reflexive to the brood phenomenon, since that's where they do their reproduction. So you can see the mite build up here with no treatment versus the mite built up here in green with intervention. So we can all start thinking about that. Okay, so what should we be doing in our hives right now in January? So basically, don't get in there, disturb them as little as possible. But when it's warm out, like it has been, actually, it's been a fairly warm winter. And if it's not raining, I see my bees flying almost every day. Watch for the pollen foragers. And if you don't see any pollen foragers, lift the cover and take a little peek. But don't be getting in there and pulling out frames. It's still a little cool for that. Note dead bees outside of the hive. This lets you know that your colony is still alive and kicking out the dead bodies. Check your entrance reducers and mouse guards. Make sure they're intact. Heft your hives and make sure that you don't need to add additional feed. If you add feed, be sure you use a candy board, fondant, or Dryvert, which is invert sugar, and you can get that at the grocery store in the baking section. Check your apiary after any big weather events or windstorms to make sure that the lids haven't been blown off and that the hives haven't been toppled or skewed in any way to let the heat out. Think about preparing for spring, repair your equipment, purchase new equipment, get it painted, order your queens, nukes, and packages now, read a new bee book or reread your favorite, and attend your bee club meetings. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I've talked about? You can put those either in the chat box or you can press down on your space bar and just chat to me if you want. Okay, so Ryan asked, with no federal leadership, the rollout is going slow. Yes. And can we do both Zoom meetings and live meetings? So that's a good question, and that's been brought up in the board meeting. And no, the answer to that, we cannot. And it's the way the platform is set up. So what some people have argued for is to film the meeting, film the bee meeting, and then upload it so that people who missed it can watch it. And that's really a great idea, but that's a lot of time and it's a lot of resources. So if I have somebody who's retired and they've got a video camera and that's just what they would love to do every month, and we decide, the vote goes that we go back to the in-person meetings, we can certainly look at that. Without having someone like that though, no, we will not be doing both. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to introduce Glenn from Bridgetown Bees, and he's going to talk to us about what's in bloom. And Glenn, you are a co-host, and you can unmute yourself and share your screen.
You're still muted, Glenn. There
How
you go.
about now?
Better.
Now you're good.
Perfect.
Now you're golden.
Yeah, and the problem is that this is a brand new, this will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see. Can you see this?
Yes, it looks good.
This is a brand new laptop as of about 4 hours ago.
Congratulations.
So
Oh, you
Oh,
are
boy.
brave. You are brave.
That's the point, Dewey. Yeah. But anyway, so here we're off, and I spoke with Cheryl at length about what I should be doing or try to do here, and we'll see if this fits the bill. So I've chosen some of what I think are some good plants to be on the lookout for, but also ones that you can plant. I mean, some of the best ones like maple trees and whatnot, not everybody has room for to plant a big leaf maple, which is huge. It'd take up your whole yard. So we'll see there. I have a couple of things to tie in with Cheryl here. It has been a fairly warm year so far, but not the warmest. Warmer than last year, but I'd say in the ballpark there. I didn't crunch any numbers there and see what the median is, but so 44, a little bit better than last year, but it's just been, even in January has been quite warm there too. So, and another thing that to tie in with what Cheryl said about mouse guards, and this is, I've showed these slides before, but the reason that we use mice guards is so those little guys don't get into your hive. And if there's more than one in there, or if one enters that is already pregnant, then you end up with these little guys on the bottom of your hive. See, that's a, I don't know if there's, yeah, I have a little pointer here. This is 1/8 inch hardware cloth here on the bottom, a screen bottom board. So those little guys are pretty small. But if you've dealt with mice in your hives before, it's not real pleasant, and it doesn't smell real good in there either. So here are some plants that are blooming. I don't have photos of every plant that bees are visiting, but I want to reiterate that the ones that I will be showing are certainly some important pollen and nectar plants, but they're not all of them. And some of the minor ones may have some amino acids in their, or proteins in their pollen that may be in short supply in bees. So don't neglect the ones that I don't consider real hot bee plants there too. So there's only one annual flower that would be blooming this time of year in my garden anyway, and this is almost could maybe make it every month of the year, but borage. I would argue that really anything that blooms in January that attracts bees is a good thing. Some of the hellebores will be blooming soon if they're not already. I think it's a pretty minor source, but nevertheless, anything is better than nothing. The crocuses will be coming up next month, maybe this month. I see in my slide here that in 2 years ago, January of 19, crocuses were up this year, that year. So you can look for those. They spread readily. This is in Wilshire Park here. That's just a meadow of them. I just really like this photo with the path that people stay on, and the dogs don't seem to trample these too much. So I appreciate that. One of the last blooming vines of the winter, jasmine. Honeysuckle attracts bees. I think this is a good one that most gardeners can have, because they can allow their brassica plants, the cabbage, cauliflower, mustards, and broccoli to bloom. After they're done producing the fruit, you can let some of the stalks go for blooms. A few fruit trees will be starting in this first quarter here. Mostly Asian pears are the earliest blooming ones, and the sweet cherries. Not a honeybee there, but a mason bee. The heaths and heathers are a plant, but not, I just very rarely see bees on those, but I have a slide that I didn't put into this collection that members of PUB have sent me with bees on them, but I very rarely see them on them, maybe because there are other better things. And in fact, this next slide is, I think, one of the best. I just can't say enough about it. This cousin of the Oregon grape, if you will. This is one variety called Arthur Menzies, and even today was not a great day, especially after the rains came, but bees were visiting this Arthur Menzies. It's that attractive that they'll leave the comfort of their hive. And another cultivar, if you will, in addition to the Arthur Menzies, is Charity. And I grow both of these, and they have slightly different bloom periods, but bees were visiting these yesterday. We will have the native Oregon grape, Mahonia aquifolium, blooming starting in March. Viburnums are out now. They're actually a quite fragrant plant too, which is nice. Everywhere else in the world, they're called hazelnuts, but in Oregon, we call them filberts. Damn it. Nice photo by Steve. I'm noticing more of these boxleaf Vizara as street trees. Not a large tree, but the bees are quite attracted to these very small blooms. Alders will be out shortly, next month. Big leaf maple later on in March. And just about all maples are good as far as I know. Norway maple, we've got a lot of them in town, and a lot of them are being replaced because it is a nuisance, considered a nuisance plant. No herbs to speak of. And I should, I didn't, but I should have entered a photo here of Phacelia here for cover crop. This is the first year that I've tried to overwinter Phacelia. And these are plants, seeds that I started by broadcasting them probably in September, and they didn't bloom, they didn't flower yet. And I had no idea that they were as hardy as they are. I know Oregon State has done many studies on this, and Phacelia always ranks to the top of one of the best plants to attract just pollinators in general. So it hasn't been the Phacelia crop has not died off at all yet, Some of my, I have volunteer potatoes sprouting, and some of those were blackened with the cold that we had a month or so ago. Maybe, I think the official low was 27, but here I don't think it got that low. Maybe 29, maybe 30. But it was definitely a heavy frost, and it killed the buckwheat, and like I said, the potatoes. But now the Phacelia is still going, so stay tuned. I'll give you an update, and whenever I'm on next, probably April. So I'll have to update that one. It's a nice green crop too. I like looking at it. Of course, dandelions are still blooming. They always do, or can. And so all of the pictures for January are posted at the Bridgetown Bees site, and the others will be updated in February and March. So that's it. If you have any other plants that you'd like to contribute, I'd love to see them. You can send them to me at the website there.
Okay, Glenn, thanks a lot. Does anybody have any questions for Glenn?
All right.
Okay, well, our featured
Is John
speaker.
on board?
Well, I don't see John. So it doesn't look like he's logged in yet. So we have some time to discuss anything else that people might want to talk about. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about what's going on with their bees, or any questions about where to get nukes or packages or anything like that?
Glenn, I can circle back to the herbs. Did the frost do in some of the stuff that was still in bloom in your yard? Rosemary and any of the mints?
Well, Dewey, I've pulled up all that mint that I can find. It was just taken over.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any blooming now. So I think so. Or not even blooming, but growing. I was pretty good. And rosemary, did you ask about rosemary specifically?
Yeah.
It has a few blooms on it now. It's a perennial, it's a evergreen. So, but I hardly ever see honeybees on rosemary, tell you the truth.
Boy, my honeybees are all over rosemary all the time.
Are they this month?
When I haven't actually been, I think on a really sunny day, I think they are.
Mm-hmm.
But did you find out anything about the witch hazel?
Well, I don't think that bees readily visit that as I don't think it's a great bee plant.
Okay.
So I've rated in my database, excellent, good, fair, and poor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I rated it fair, and I didn't list any below good for our purposes here.
I think mainly because, I would guess that it's because it's usually blooming when it's pretty cold out, since it's a winter bloomer.
Yeah.
I
have it in my database, but I don't grow it, so I don't have you have it though now, don't you?
I will take a picture if I ever see.
Yes,
if I can time it.
On here.
Yeah.
Hey, can I say something to Dewey?
Yes.
Hey, Dewey, thank you for that honey tasting. That was really great. I appreciate you putting that on.
Well, you can tell I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to look at Marie's book? She has
No.
a fantastic book on honey. So
Yeah.
she has something like 20 different cookbooks.
Yeah.
So she's a well-known publisher. Yep. Taste of Honey.
Yeah.
Well, good. Glad to hear that, Bruce.
Okay. So Susie asked, when did Glenn plant his cilia?
Phacelia?
Well, yes, I guess that she spelled it Pysilla. Is that Phacelia?
That's probably what she means.
Okay.
I seeded it in thinking here. what did I pull up in that area there? I guess it was beets that I had harvested. And what was at the other end? I can't remember, but probably in September.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
it readily seeds itself. Once it blooms, it'll reseed. That was one of my neighbors. Do I have time to tell this story, Cheryl?
Well, Eric has a question, and he just wanted to know, he says he treated for Varroa a little late over the summer due to the heat and forest fires, and they're still getting some mite drop on his bottom boards, and he wants to know when is the soonest he can start treating again in the spring, or should start treating.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anybody.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I would say, generally speaking, we start really getting excited about mites and start, evaluating in April and May. You can do a mite count and see what they look like. So you may want to do, I would say, maybe doing a mite treatment as early as late April. But what does the group think?
What about oxalic acid?
Yeah, there's relatively little brood. There is some, but there's relatively little. So you could still do, if you have the equipment, you could still do the oxalic acid vaporization or the drizzle if you don't have the equipment. Yeah. As we get more and more brood, that's going to become a little bit less effective. The commercials will start a treatment almost right away. And their preferred spring treatment would be the Amitraz, the Apivar.
Is there a lower temperature range for that Amitraz, Dewey?
No, that one doesn't seem to have a range. They have to walk on it. So I think the trick with using that is to make sure the brood stay where it is. Otherwise it gets ignored and you don't get the treatment effect. The others, yeah, 65 is below 65 with your acids, you're not getting much vaporization at all, and likewise with the essential oils, the Apiguard or the Apolife R. So as Cheryl indicated, April, Mayish, but I would also, as she recommend, do a mite count first.
In those months, not necessarily now, opening up the hive and killing bees.
No, I wouldn't do it now, Glenn, right? But by April, we ought to be starting to have, last year, pretty booming colonies.
Yeah. And they were swarming last year in March.
Yes. Yeah, into March or in April, they went gangbusters. Yep.
All right, Glenn. Well, John is here and ready to start.
Okay.
So if you want to, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I'm really happy to see the flowers back. That's one of my favorite things. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Glenn.
Okay, so welcome John Edwards, and John is the former owner of Rural Bee, and he is the current owner of Hive and Garden in West Lynn, and he puts together all this great equipment, and I'm one of his regular customers, and I'm a very satisfied customer, and he's going to talk to us today about making spring splits and nukes to manage your spring swarms. So John, your co-host, and you can share your screen and unmute yourself. And you're still muted.
Unmute. Okay.
There you go. Okay, I can hear you.
Start. Okay, and now you're going to give me the screen, or
No, you just reach down with your cursor and share your screen. There you go.
Oh, that's kind of weird. Just a minute here. Okay. So now I can go into display mode, I guess. Right. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. We just see you.
Okay. Let's see now.
So if you float your cursor down towards the bottom.
What's this Zoom thing? Yeah.
You see the green tab that says share your screen.
I'm in a weird mode. Let me see. Post
Okay.
attendee.
Hold on, let me just make double sure that I have you as co-host.
Because I'm in Zoom, but I think I'm out of the. Do I need to log back in?
Nope, nope, don't do anything. Just relax here for a minute. Let me just make
All right,
sure
I've
that,
got my
okay,
green
yes,
screen.
okay.
I'll just.
So I did make you a co-host. So if you'll float your cursor down towards the bottom of the black band towards the very bottom of your monitor.
Yeah, see, I'm not seeing any of that. I think I'm, just a minute. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I'm out of Zoom. I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna just close these screens and I'm gonna link back in again.
Is your screen just maximized?
Well, I can check that. No, well, it was, yes. That's not it. It's just, I'm in Zoom, but I'm not in a session of any kind. I'm just in a general Zoom. I'll be back here in a second here.
So instead of the Zoom app
Okay,
in a browser window.
just give me a second here. Okay, so that's the Zoom screen, I guess. Oh, now I'm seeing someone's bed. Glenn and Andreessen. Hello.
No, you're where you
Okay,
need
there we
to
go.
be. Okay.
There we go. I can see you now. I'm going to share my screen.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
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 Yes.
Good. Yeah, that didn't. Okay, that worked. I think this time.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, and then I'm going to go into present. I guess I'm in presentation mode. I am. Yeah. Okay.
You are.
I think I'm
Perfect.
ready to go.
Okay, good job.
Okay. Lost a few minutes there, but
Don't worry, we are doing good.
okay. Well, hi to everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this pub Zoom meeting. And I will just get started. A very brief history about us. I'll keep this short. I think Cheryl's already covered it. We used to be Ruleby Supply. We bought Ruleby Supply in 2006, sold it in 2014, 15, something like that. That company unfortunately went out of business in end of 2018. So we just started up Hive and Garden. The initial intention was to sort of have a little smallish kind of operation. More recently, my son has joined me this last year, and we've been actually quite busy, getting, really busy. Our business model, where we started as a hybrid. We actually started purely online, but I got a lot of local pressure to have some sort of local access. So we started a Saturday store. And we also do pickup by arrangement. And that seems to be satisfactory for customers so far as I can tell. We actually design and manufacture quite a lot of equipment. And we also carry the rest of the stuff that we don't build. We try to stock Northwest made products or US made product. Importing is our last line of procurement. And we do a little consulting, but not a whole lot. Most of the consulting I do is free. Okay, so getting into nukes. This is a huge topic, as anyone that's got much experience with it knows. I'm not sure the experience base of the attendees. I'm assuming that there's, from what Cheryl told me, quite a few sort of 0 to 3 year beekeepers. That's probably maybe the majority. And so I'm targeting to that audience. So for the more experienced of you, if you get a bit bored with some of the details, and if you want to add any comments, please feel free to do so. There's nothing worse than a monologue, and so dialogue is my favorite mode. Okay, so this picture here is of a nuke, what we would call a nuke day at the old Rule B in Wilsonville, which was owned by Brushy Mountain. Couple hundred nukes or whatever it was had been brought in. And this I thought was an interesting picture because it triggered a thought in my little brain here, which is that, you know, these guys, they actually make thousands of nukes every year. And I know when I first got into beekeeping, I would hear people discussing making a nuke in pretty casual terms. And I always thought, you know, it's not that easy. Why are they talking about it as though it's, you know, it's kind of nothing, you know, it's easy. That certainly wasn't my view then, and my view hasn't changed. I've got more experience under my belt, quite a bit more experience, but still I view it as a relatively complex operation and something that you should take pretty seriously. And if you're really smart about it, you can leverage some of the other aspects of beekeeping into your splits and nuke making. So that's kind of the theme I'm going to follow. So these guys, these are commercial beekeepers that make these nukes. They make thousands of them. They have a process. They probably don't even have to think about it. It's almost automatic for them. But the fact is, you don't make thousands of nukes every year without having a pretty rigorous, well-defined, well-controlled process. So that's worth keeping in mind. Now, for me, when I think of nukes, I think of them more like, or making splits. It's akin to surgery. You've got this pre-op where you've got to understand the history of the patient. You've got certain procedures that you have to follow in a certain way, and you've got all of this outcome planning. And I think that's a useful model when we talk about making nukes. It's in a sense, it's beehive surgery, and we should think of it in these three stages, or at least this is how I think of it. And I'm not trying to say that the list of things I put in each stage is comprehensive or complete. It's just things I threw down there as examples. But the point is, if you prepare in advance before you do your split, you're going to be better off. And if you follow up thoroughly, you're going to be better off. In fact, I would argue that probably these two are at least as equal in their value to the success of the split as the actual split itself, especially if you're doing it at the right time, and I'll explain that in a minute. So speaking of timing, this is something that I've often thought of. This is how I do my beekeeping. I'm not saying that you guys should do the same, but I'm just sharing with you what works for me. I tend to do all of my splits in the first part of the season, and I sort of reference the vernal equinox, the summer solstice, and autumnal. That's not because I'm a witch or warlock or anything. It's just that I kind of think of those kind of things. And so, the main point is that in this sort of left part of the time frame of the season, everything is on the up. Everything is increasing. It's getting better, and so. The bees are in expansion mode, there's more nectar, blah, blah, blah. And so there's a lot of forgiveness here. You can make a lot of mistakes here, and they're fixable. You get onto this right side of the timeline, you can certainly still make nukes, and if but you have to be a bit, you've got less room for error, and you're fighting against nature instead of using nature to sort of buoy you up. Or to put it a different way, a rising tide floats all boats. That's what I'm saying. And so that's the seasonal timing. So I actually really don't make splits after July. End of July is my absolute hard deadline, and usually it's end of June. I like to be done. My splits early in the day. That does happen sometimes. That there is an advantage because the foragers that aren't flying yet, so you can lose fewer foragers if you do your split early. You can certainly do splits throughout the day, no problem. It's just that you might lose a few more forages in the process. And at the end of the day, I tend, even though you can do splits then, and you know, if the foragers have returned, at least in theory, you could do it, but usually it's late enough that the bees are in a bad mood, and so I tend not to do any splits. In fact, I hardly do any beekeeping in the evening. I just don't like it. Now, this slide here is one I put together a long time ago. The source material was not actually mine. It was from a very reputable commercial beekeeper. I sort of took that and massaged it a lot, and sort of have got a lot of value out of this. So this again is a timeline kind of view of the world. And in the top section here, going horizontally, there's the colony activity, and the next section down is the timing of pests and diseases, and the bottom is colony management that should correspond to the above. So as we know, we got the build-up in the spring, and you know, the colony build-up, and swarming starts sometime in April. So somebody made reference that swarms were starting as early as March last year. So these timelines, as you know, consider them approximate and varying by season, and even micro climate. What happens in 2,000 feet up in the mountains isn't the same as what happens down here in the Willamette Valley. So down here we've got, you know, what would a lot of people would consider ideal pest and disease control timeframe. We were just talking about that. Dewey had mentioned sort of March, April. You know, I would certainly agree with that. And then we start thinking about swarm control, and then nukes, divides, and splits. And obviously there's an overlap here between the divides and splits and the swarming and the build-up and pest control and swarming. So in that overlap, it seems to me there's some opportunity. And the opportunity, one of the opportunities is maybe this is to do a little integrated pest management as we do our splits. And this slide is not my own, it's been around a long time. And the basic idea of it is that it's sort of talking about combining management methods with sort of this basis of cultural methods all the way up to sort of the cultural methods tend to be preventative, the conventional methods, pesticides, etc., tend to be both more toxic and more interventionist. So someone at Penn State, I'm not sure who, sort of did a beekeeping version of this. And down in the very bottom right here, they talk about resistant bee stock, small comb, and then break-in brood cycle. So I sort of made my own version of this to sort of focus just a little more on this. And it seems to me that there is certainly the opportunity to, as you're doing your splits, making your nukes, you can introduce, you know, different stock, mite-resistant stock, or at least, even if not mite-resistant, sort of different genes into the gene pool of your apiary. And so that's one opportunity for sort of a integrated pest management thing. And then brood break itself. Well, the brood break, in my mind, that's really, I don't know too many people who are doing queen isolation. I know there's been some good experiments done in Italy on that, and I think it's a very interesting field. I don't know anyone that's routinely, as far as their beekeeping, going in and isolating the queen either before or during or after a mite treatment. But it's an interesting idea. But colony splits, of course, creates a brood break. So there's an opportunity there. And I guess my point is that if we do it simply by timing, maybe we get leverage by combining the chemical methods here, the interventionist, slightly more toxic techniques with these sort of cultural, non-toxic techniques, simply by timeline, that's all, nothing else. And so this is sort of what I had in mind. There's nothing clever about it. So if you can get your timing right, if you treat your colonies before you do your split, then, you know, a bit like the patient, if a patient comes in for surgery and they've got, they're either too skinny or overweight and they need to lose weight, or if their blood pressure is wrong or whatever, if they're not in good shape, the surgery might be deferred. Well, you know, using that analogy, if we can get our bees in best shape before we do the split, then that's all to our advantage. And of course, by doing that, they're not only healthier because they don't have any mites sucking hemolymph out of them, but they also have a lower mite load going into the split. So the split hive is going to have a lower load, which is great. And for that matter, the source hive. I mean, I would say that it's probably not prudent. I'd love to know what other people think on this, but it's not prudent to do a mite treatment and then immediately do a split. I certainly don't do that, and you know, probably wouldn't encourage people to do it. I think you need some sort of recovery time, which I've sort of illustrated on this timeline. Whether it's a week or whatever, you know, it seems to me there should be some sort of a break there. And also, it depends a bit on what kind of treatment you're doing. Admittedly, you know, oxalic acid, you know, it's a bit late in the sense that you're not going to kill any brood mites. But if you want to do a flash treatment, you know, a week before you're doing a split, maybe it's not a bad idea. Or you're doing some of the more longer term treatments, that's got to be scheduled in advance so that you still, I think, still have a break. And then once you've done your split, you've got a follow-on brood break from the fact of doing the split itself. So that gives you sort of a double hit on the mites. Now this was just about timing of that brood break and how long it is. I'll skip that. So one of the other topics on splits that I think, you know, we've all done this. We've all gone out and thought, you know, that colony is really strong. I should split that before it swarms on me. And there, you know, we don't get round to it, and it goes, and you feel like an idiot. You know, I've done this countless times myself. So the question sort of comes up, well, you know, what is the timing of a swarm development? How long does it take for a colony to sort of evolve from maybe taking the first steps toward a swarm to actually throwing a swarm? Now, this diagram I've had it for a long time, and I'm not sure where I got it from. I might have found it on Michael Bush's page, but the feeling it came from a beekeeper in the UK, and I'll explain that in a minute, who had an interest in developing a swarm prediction technique using electronics. So somebody put together this diagram, and I actually really like this diagram, even though I think it's a bit suspect. And one of the things I think is suspect is they've got these nice linear, curves here, and nature just tends not to be that way. So any of the biologists, entomologists, Dewey, anyone that's got any views on this timeline, I would love to hear it. But you know, this person is essentially saying that the evolution of the swarm takes about 3 weeks. You see this timeline on the bottom. And it starts with the colony reducing feeding of the queen, and that results in a reduction in egg laying. You get a cup that gets an egg deposited in it in about 10 days or so, and then that cup develops into a swarm cell, and then it issues out. So you know, there's been this a common saying that, well, if you want to catch a swarm, you've got to get it before there's a sealed swarm cell in there. Another point about swarming, I don't know what experience you guys have, but I've dealt over the years with thousands and thousands of customers, and what I have seen is something that actually was told to me by the previous owner of Rule B. I thought, oh, okay, you know, that's interesting. So what he told me was, you know, John, it happens every year. It's been happening this every year that we've run this business. You get into sort of the April time frame, and we get this miserable spring Willamette Valley weather where you get weeks of continuous rain, more or less, and the weather's in the 50s or whatever, and the bees can't get out very much, but they are getting out a bit, but you know, you're still having to feed them a little bit maybe. And then you get a sunny day and boom, you get masses and masses of swarms. And this happens every year. It's a phenomenon. I don't know if other people talk about it, but I see it because I deal with all of the customer calls and non-customer calls with calling me about the swarms, and you can predict it. It's like clockwork. So there's this sort of, I'm having a bit of a hard time reconciling this sort of nice linear timeline of about 3 weeks of swarm development with this sort of elasticity and swarm issuing that seems to be tied to the weather. So that aside, there is a preparation time, and you need to catch your swarms early, and so you've got to start, you know, looking for swarm cups. So what does the swarm cell look like? This is kind of what it looks like. These are not particularly good swarm cells, but it's usually on the edges of the frames, and once they're capped like this, many people will tell you, oh, it's too late. They're going to swarm. You've missed the opportunity to do a split. Maybe, maybe not. So this, just for a point of reference, this is a much nicer looking swarm cell that has been opened up. It's torn out at the bottom, which means the queen has emerged. And then, since we're going to be talking about emergency cells, I thought in splits and using emergency cells as part of your split method, it's useful to sort of understand the difference between a regular supersedure cell, a swarm cell, and an emergency cell. Excuse me. So these pictures were kind of good. The supersedure cell, you can see it goes straight down, and it's pressed nearer to the base of the foundation. That's because it's built off sort of the base of the foundation pretty much. The emergency cell is not. The emergency cell is typically built off drawn out comb. So they're adding this, the cell around drawn out comb. So that results in these sort of shorter, stubbier looking cells. And there's both supersedure cells and swarm cells are in the middle of the frame as opposed to the edge. But they also tend to have a bit of an angle on them. So if you're having a hard time distinguishing between the two, look for a bit of an angle and look for size. And that's a fairly good clue. It's not 100% because sometimes even supersedure cells might look a bit like, you know, swarm cells, but those are two sort of examples. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this diagram I saw somewhere, it was on Trunch Beekeeping, credit to them, is there's this sort of notion that, you know, raising a split from an emergency cell is not necessarily the best strategy. And there are a number of reasons cited for that. And I think one of them is, you know, you look at these emergency cells and they don't look very impressive. They're kind of small and a bit of an angle, as I said. And you think, yeah, you know, those queens can't be much good. But in fact, what's going on inside, that queen is bigger than she looks because she's occupying part of the drawn comb as well. So she's not as short as she looks. Okay, so moving on from that to how you're going to queen your nuke. And this is not in order of preference. I think how you do it depends on a range of things, and but I think it's useful to go through it. So the swarm cells are pretty good. You know, they're great. They've been made because everything's going well with the hive, and you can exploit those swarm cells either by using them directly, or if you want, you can use them as donor cells, cut them out and use them to start some other split or nuke. If you do that, you need to cut a big wide tab around it so you don't damage the actual cell itself. So the emergency cells, though, I still think a pretty good way to go. There's this debate about the quality of them, and I'd welcome anyone's view on it. But you know, one of the reasons cited often for them perhaps not being as good is because maybe there's a higher risk that the queen was developed from an older stage larvae, and that would result in a lower quality queen. Other people say, no, that's not the case, you know, that is a perfectly fine thing to do. And I tend to be more in the camp that, hey, it's okay to do it. But in either case, you know, you are in terms of timing for your split, if you're going to do this, you've got to make sure that you're in the mating season, or at least once you get the split going, that, you know, mating season is around the corner at very least. Otherwise, you're stuck because you've got this virgin queen running around. And then purchasing a queen, which is actually what I tend to do more of because of my own beekeeping practice. That gives you the opportunity to introduce into your split different genetics, maybe mite-resistant behavior genetics, and you can get, you know, I sometimes hear the comments that, well, you know, buying a queen from a queen breeder is not such a good idea, that, you know, they do a crappy job, etc. And I think maybe that's the case for some of them, but there are some pretty good professional queen breeders around that I have a high regard from and would be very happy to buy a queen from them at any time. I think over the years, and with all my experience in it anyway, queen breeders have good years and bad years. You know, even the very best have years when they don't seem to do as good a job as they did the last year. So I think, you know, I tend to give them a little bit of slack because these guys are making thousands and thousands of queens. They've got a good process down, and frankly, they're probably doing a better job than most of us would. But if you're going to do a split, then just don't, you've got to time it, because you're going to buy your queen and have it there ready to do your split. You don't want your queen, the worst thing is for the queen to wait around for the split. You don't want to have your queen sitting around in the queen cage for days on end. A queen that's sitting in a cage is going to deteriorate pretty fast, so you don't want to do that. Okay, one of the other topics on splits is, how big is the split? How many frames should you take? Now, I view it as a continuum, sort of. If things are all going really well, like up in the top, you've got really good brood in there, you know, good brood density, a good mix of brood, got lots of adult bees, then you got a good nectar flow, weather conditions are right, then you can get away with smaller, you know, on the left, going back to that time diagram, if you're on the left side of the time diagram, you can get away with smaller splits. Personally, I, just from experience, have defaulted to 5-frame splits, maybe 4 frames at the lowest every time. And that's simply because, in my own experience, 2 and 3 frame splits, I have a lower success rate than I do with 4 and 5 frame splits. You know, maybe that's because I'm not doing the 2 or 3 frame splits very well. And I would say the worst experience I've had, and I've, you know, experimented with this, is when I've made really small splits, you know, in the post-July time frame. Those have been, you know, I've tried that I tried that once for 2 or 3 years running, and my success rate was quite low. So I tend to do 4 or 5 frame splits in the sort of April to end of July time frame. I was going to talk, let's see. Yeah, I was going to talk about finding the queen. Maybe I should skip that for now, unless someone wants to particularly go into it. You know, it's very useful to find the queen when you're doing a split. You don't have to, but I think it's a good thing to practice. I think I'll skip over that for the moment. So then, that's sort of some of the basics of that apply, I think, to any split. And then we get into the question of split methods. Before I do, are there any questions on the stuff that I've covered so far? Let me see. I'm not seeing. Cheryl, how do I look to see if there are any questions?
I'm scanning the chat box and I'm not seeing any questions, but if
Okay.
anybody wants to take
Oh,
a
I
few
know,
minutes.
I got it. I see 3 chat. I don't know what he's saying.
Uh-huh.
3 weeks. Oh, that's from Dewey. Thank you, Dewey. 3 weeks. Yep. Okay. So we agree, and he agrees. You only see it in the last week. This is a comment from Dewey. I like it. Starts with rearing drones, ratio of brood to adults. Yes, you're right. And that diagram is from England. It's from a guy whose name Edward somebody. That time diagram, that swarm diagram I showed, he was a BBC sound engineer, and he was a beekeeper, and he developed this device using analog electronics to detect the sound in beehives, the changes in sound that would indicate a swarm is developing. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to go through a number of splits here, and there's far more split approaches than I could possibly cover, and I think it can be sort of overwhelming to go through too many anyway. So I'm just going to go through some. I'm not saying these are sort of that you should do everything the way I'm showing. I'm just sort of showing them as reference methods that you can, deviate from as much as you feel like. The first split I wanted to talk about was the walkaway split. I hear people talking about this a fair amount. I personally don't do this very often. In fact, I hardly ever do it, I have to admit, unless maybe I'm very desperate. So this is the crudest of, in my view anyway, the crudest of crude splits. So all you're doing is taking this top box. I'm assuming in all of these that you've got a two box hive. You're taking this top box and you're pulling it off and you're putting it down below. And then you walk away. Then you might come back in a few days and kind of look to see what's happened. Or you don't, you just don't come back until, weeks later. And you just hope that one of the boxes has the queen and the other one is going to raise an emergency cell. And that's a split of sorts. I would say it's not ideal. I certainly know people that do it. But what I do like about it is that for anyone that's sort of daunted by the notion of a split, this is a very, very simple split. You can't get simpler than this. But what you can do is a modified version of a walkaway split, where you do the first split, where you, just as I showed before, you take the top box and you put it on a bottom board, and you put a lid on it, and you've done your split. And then you come back later as a stage 2, and you have a look and see what you did. And then you might find that you've got a queen that's doing just great in one box, and you've got a box here that, if you're lucky, it's emerging, it's raising a nice emergency cell, and everything's great. You just have to wait it out until that emergency cell turns into a virgin queen that goes and gets mated and successfully comes back and is accepted, etc. So you can easily turn your sort of very crude walkaway split into something a bit more intelligent by just coming back and having a look. And you might find that in here that you've got nothing. You don't know what's going to be in here. And so, for example, you might even have pulled a swarm cell over here. when you did that, and maybe the colony emerged from the bee, that there was going to be a queen that was about to emerge from a swarm cell. So you might even find, even after a few days, a virgin queen running around in there. But at least you can go back and look. And if things are looking really bleak, it's not too late to go and buy a queen and drop a queen in there. Any questions on that? I don't know how many people do this. Is anyone on the call that does this, the walk-away split on a regular basis? Oh, let me see, chat. No, guess not. Okay, and so I've showed these as splits, just transferring complete hive boxes. I tend not to do this myself. I mean, you see people talking about it and doing it. For my own reasons, I tend to do my splits into a nucleus hive box. I just think it works better for me. But in the case of a nuke, it's really the same thing, except you're filling up a smaller space. I would suggest taking at least 3 frames of brood and 2 of you know, a good amount of honey. And so that will be your split. It's the same thing, except you're doing it into a smaller box. One thing about doing splits into smaller box, into a nuke box versus a full box, I don't know how many people would agree with this, but you know, I felt that I've had more success doing splits into nuke boxes, and I don't think I have a good explanation for that. One explanation might be that in the smaller box, the queen's pheromone she's got fewer bees to disperse her pheromone over, and it's in a smaller space. So maybe the queen acceptance is a bit stronger in a nuke box. I certainly, when I'm doing requeening, I always do it into a nuke box first. I don't know if anyone's had any similar experience. Now, another approach is the shaking bee method. I've done this a few times. I don't really like it very much, but it seems to be popular. I've watched several YouTube channels talking about this, almost as though it's a magic formula. And, you know, maybe it is. So in the last example with the walk-away split, you didn't have to find the queen. That was the big advantage, if you like. And for people that just don't like looking for queens, that's an advantage. It's the same with the shaking bee split. You don't have to look for the queen. So you start with your 2-box hive, and what you do is you take off the top box and you put it on a bottom board, and you take out each frame and you shake all of the bees off the frame into the source hive box, and you're going through that and through all of those. Some people will use a sort of I'll describe it as a bin with a hole in it, so it acts more like a funnel, so you're not shaking bees all over the place. But that's the basic idea. And it's pretty disruptive. And then what you do is, after you've shaken all the bees in, you put a queen excluder on top of the bottom hive box, and then you return this box that you took off, you put it back on again, and then you put the lid on. And now you've done, now what's happened at this point, you have confirmed by what you just did that the queen is in the bottom. So that's all you've really done at this point. You've shaken all the bees out to ensure that the queen is down below and she's not up above. And you've done that by shaking, and using the queen excluder. And then the next day, or maybe even less than a day, it doesn't have to be a full day, you're going to pull this box off to do the split. And now you know that the source hive has the queen and the split hive doesn't. And then you're either going to drop in a queen or raise an emergency cell, or steal a swarm cell from somewhere. Yeah. Anyone do much of this? Sounds like no response. Okay. So this is one I've done a few times. And usually it's when I think what I'm trying to do is rescue a hive I know is going to swarm. So it's kind of, I do them out of desperation more than anything. So in this particular case, what you do is you start with your box, your 2-box hive, you start a 3rd box here, you get some drawn out comb with a bit of honey in it. And then what you're going to do in this case is this requires you to find the queen. So if you don't like finding the queen, you won't like doing this method, but you've got to go in here and you've got to find the queen in your source hive and put her in a queen catcher and or somehow isolate her. What you can do is just remove the frame with the queen on and put it in a separate box somewhere. And then you are going to search through the whole hive for any swarm cells that you can find. And you've got to be really thorough about that. You don't know exactly where they're going to be, might be in both boxes. And you've got to pull out all the swarm cell combs and either destroy them or take them over and put them in the split hive. And then you've got to backfill the hive with some, empty drawn comb. So you've opened up this hive. And then you take your queen that you isolated and you drop her into the split box. And so now you've got a queen that's in a new box with no swarm cells, brood cells, but not swarm cells. And you've got the source hive that's got swarm cells, but not the queen. So you've got swarm cells over here. And I think I said that wrong earlier, excuse me. What I'm trying to say is that this hive over here has no swarm cells. This hive here, you've got to find the cells and keep them over here. So you want swarmless cells over here. So you've got a queen with brood and no swarm cells. You've got a queenless hive here with swarm cells. And you create a lot of space in here. So that it feels opened up. And if you're lucky, this colony decides it doesn't need to swarm anymore. So that's that one. And so you put the box back and that's what you got. And then of course you can do that with a new box as well. So this type of split, I would say I do more of these than any other, partly because for much of the season, I have a steady source of queens because we bring in queens every year. And so if I have excess, I can make splits out of them. So this is a pretty straightforward split. The only thing is it requires you to find the queen. Because what you're going to do is take out you're going to start, you're going to create your box over here with some empty comb. You're going to pull some comb over here, but you don't want to put the queen over here. Typically you don't anyway, I don't. So you keep the queen over here, which means you've got to find her and isolate her before you start popping drawn comb or brood comb into this box here. And so you end up with some empty comb in your source hive. The mother queen stays in this hive. This is queenless until you drop in a queen. And you want to wait a day before you drop in this queen. I'd say I do more of this kind of split than anything else. It's pretty easy as long as you're willing to find the queen. Let's see. I'm just looking at, so John, if you do the split where you leave swarm cells in the source hive, if you leave multiple swarm cells. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So you could decide, but it could. So you've got a choice. You could just take that risk, or just cut them all down and leave one good swarm cell. So the question is, well, going back to the emulating a swarm, what happens if you leave all of those swarm cells in there? Where is that thing? If you leave the swarm cells back in here, are they going to swarm anyway? Maybe, but you've sort of, the hope is that you've created a condition where they think that they have swarmed, and so the one of these swarm cells is going to emerge, and that's it. Whether that happens or not, I mean, I've done this a few times, and I won't say it's worked every time, but I have had some success doing this. I would say that when I've done it, I've pretty much kind of really wrecked the hive. I've really made a mess of the source hive to sort of disrupt it as much as possible. This is the one case where I like to actually create a lot of disruption in the colony to sort of make it have a major reset. But yeah, I would say it doesn't work every time. Maybe it's to do with how old those capped swarm cells are, whether it's only just capped over or they're about to emerge out.
So John, I guess the question is because I know that some colonies will swarm multiple times.
Oh, I see. Will it reissue?
Right.
Oh, it could, yeah. I mean, there's no control.
So basically, if you're going to do that, just maybe cut out a lot of the extra swarm cells and keep your best looking one.
Yeah. I mean, you've got lots of options there. You could even you can do lots of things. You could take all of the swarm cells out and put a queen in this one too. It really depends what you want to do. Or you could take harvest some of those swarm cells and leave a good one in, and hope that swarm doesn't issue, and you've got some swarm cells to put into another hive. But if you do that, if you take out the swarm cells, you've got to cut a big swath around the cell itself. Yeah. So yeah, that's the emulating one. I think it's to be honest, I think it's sort of an act of desperation. But think of it this way: if you go into a colony that looks as though it's going to swarm, this is like a box of resources, and you can go into that box of resources and start pulling stuff out. You can pull out the queen and some brood and start your split colony. So you've got that, even if the source colony does swarm, you've at least got a split colony. And by the way, that does bring up another point. This is one of the cases where I like to bring over a lot of swarm cells. I didn't bring over a swarm, I mean, a lot of brood comb. Here I've shown 4. You could even take more. One that creates more space over here, but also it's going to sort of spread the risk. If this thing is going to go, well, you may as well make your split colony as strong as possible so that you're recovering as much as you can. At least that's how I look at it. And of course, as you said rightly, you can steal some swarm cells out of it to put into another colony. Or you could even break this colony down further and sort of make another nuke right out of this colony. So you got multiple options there. Emulating swarm, we did that. Classic splits, I said that's kind of what I do the most. It's simple. It's kind of a one-step operation because you're doing the splitting. Well, not quite. You're doing a splitting, but you still have to wait, at least a few hours, maybe up to a day before you drop in the queen. But that's a pretty easy second step. It's a very quick step. And this is the same thing again, except at the nuke level. And then there's another method that I have done a bit, but I see it showing up on YouTube all the time. And so the idea with this is that you got your standard hive box and you use a double screen board. I'm not sure if I actually grabbed one here in a second. bear with me. So sure, if I wanted to show something, how do I, let's see, how can I?
Hold it in front of your camera where your face
Oh,
is.
can you guys see this if I'm showing it?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a double screen board. All it is a frame with a panel in it, and you've got a screen on both sides that creates separation of about 3/8 of an inch. And on one end of the board, you've got two small entrances here, and I'll explain why did I do two small entrances. So these seem to have sort of got popular recently for doing splits. And the idea is something, if I lost my mouse. Let's see. Some reason my mouse is not working. Okay, I'm just using my keyboard. Okay, I'm back. So how do I get rid of that thing? There we go, good. So with a double screen, what you're doing is you're breaking open this hive and you're putting a double screen between them. And so this is a method where one of the reasons I think it's gained in popularity is because you don't have to find the queen. So in a sense, this is a bit like a walkaway split, because all you're doing is getting this double screen that I just showed you, and you're sticking it between the two boxes. And then, you know, hopefully anyway, if you're lucky, your queen is in the lower box and your upper box has become queenless. It doesn't have to be done that way, but that's the more convenient way. And then you can sort of let this column, I mean, basically that is the split right there. But there's a little more support for this split, if you like, because of these pheromones coming, or the heat coming up from above. Maybe you get a bit more sort of, let's say it's colder weather or something, I don't know. You might get more support because you've got this double screen separation. So the heat is going through to the upper split. And then essentially, you know, you either drop in a queen after a day or so in this top box if there is no queen, or you let a emergency cell develop. And then at your leisure, the nice thing about this is that because you've got two full boxes up here, you can kind of take your time. I guess this is one of the other benefits before you take off this top box, because there's no sort of real urgency to do that. You can do it when you've got a mind to, and you end up, you know, with kind of that. So that's, I suppose I could see where this would be kind of a cool method. I've tended to do this when I've had I tend to use a double screen more when I've got a weak colony, and I'll stick it on top of a strong colony to try and boost it up. And if that colony becomes queenless, or, you know, or if the queen in it is crap anyway, then I'll replace it. So I tend to use a double screen more for that than for this double screen split method. Anyone on the call done this? No one's answering anyway. Okay, and then you get into, has anyone heard of a resource hive? So this is sort of nearer to the spirit of a resource hive, where you can split up boxes with divider boards. In this case, in this example, you've got your double screen that goes between it. But then what you do is you open up your box. First thing you're going to do is create a space between your groups of 5 frames, and then you're going to put a divider board in there. And then again, you know, there's kind of an assumption here that you've got your queen down below, or you could just make sure that she is down below before you do that, before you put. So what I would do if I was doing this, I would make sure the queen's down below, I'd put the double screen on, and then I would put the divider board in. Then I know I've got 2 queenless nukes up here in effect, and then you can decide what you want to do with these. At some point, you are going to take these off when you think they're ready, either because you've dropped in a queen, and you can put them in here, and you've got your splits that way. I haven't done this very much. I've kind of played with it a bit. More like this actually is what I've done. So this is more like a resource hive way, and this is also good for overwintering, but it's a nuke. It's basically, instead of stacking 2 nucleus hive boxes on top of each other, you can do something like this, where you use your 10-frame hive and you use a divider board between them. And so you create a nuke here, and then either with or without the double screen, you can either extend your nuke to be a 2-tall nuke without this double screen, or if you want to sort of create more nukes, you can put a double screen in here, and then you can add queens up here to make that. So that's another approach. Has anyone tried doing the double nuke hive or a resource hive? No.
John, I call them resource hives. I make those up, all the time, to have the concept of 2 hives plus a resource hive. In other words, that smaller hive to use in any way.
So that
if you've got more hives, your double here is a nice one. Your double on top is a nice one because you've got 2 resources on top of a regular hive.
Yeah. So this one here you're talking about, this.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is more of your classic resource hive, except in a standard resource hive, there's not actually a divider board. What you have is 2 4-frame nuke boxes sitting side by side, and that works great. There's nothing wrong with that at all. This is just a little easier because it's just a divider. It's easier, it's more flexible, and you can get 5 frames in each nuke instead of just 4. So,
yeah,
but it does depend on. Sorry, go ahead.
Less equipment, and you're getting the benefit of the warmth from below. They'll come along faster. The resource hives will develop a little faster than as set alone separate nuke hives off on the side.
Yep. Yeah, so this is not a bad method here, and it's kind of fairly simple. And you can, as I said, you can take this to the extreme, where you just keep building nukes in this sort of nuke factory, where you just. I'm not sure. I think you're right, Dewey. I think this approach is probably the better of the two. This, I think, is more if you just wanted to have 2-box tall nuke hives, and you want to share the heat for winter. So you've got 2 colonies in here, but they're expanding vertically. That's what's happening if you get rid of that double screen. So if there's no double screen, you've got 10 frames, but you've got them in 2 nuke boxes going vertically. And I think that's as far as I want to go with this. That's plenty to talk about. And I've got some other stuff, but I think that's probably as good a place as any to stop. And if there's any, I want to talk about this stuff.
Well, that's great. Now I know how to make a lot of different types of nukes.
Yeah.
Get the energy.
As I said in one of the slides, I think most of us, we're not that adventurous, and we kind of do something that works for us. We get comfortable with it, we fall in love with it, and we just do it over and over again. There's nothing wrong with that. But these are some of the ways to do it, and none of them are unreasonable, and you can make any of them work. And I think that the point I'd leave you with is that it doesn't really matter which specific type of split that you do. I really think that all of those first factors that I talked about up front are actually far more important than exactly what type of split that you do. It's all of the timing, the preparation, the post-split care that's more likely to give you success than any particular approach to the nuke itself.
And I've
So this-
noticed that every slide that you've talked about, every slide has said you need to feed this nuke with sugar syrup and pollen substitute until they've readjusted. And so, you know, would you recommend feeding these new nukes through the season just to support them for their first year, or how do you do that?
Well, it depends on the time of year, what you're going to do with them. I mean,
But a spring,
last year, for example, I think the answer would have been yes, because it was such a miserable year that there really wasn't a whole lot coming in, and we were feeding our regular colonies, you know, through the bulk of the year. And I think a lot of people were, but if you're in a good year, I don't think that's necessarily what you need to do. So yeah, you just have to read it, and you've got to make sure that they've got the food. You've got to go in and either weigh it or check it somehow to see that they've got enough resources available, because that's one of the drawbacks of the small nuke split is that there's less resources available. I guess you could argue, yeah, but there's fewer bees, so the ratio of bees to resources maybe is about the same, but still, you know, you've got less overall resources in a nuke box than you do in a full 10 frame box. So yeah, I think you're a little more vulnerable with nuke boxes in feeding. You've got to stay on top of them.
yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake new beekeepers get into, is that they don't realize that they have to feed for that first year and really support that developing young colony.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and one way to do that, I mean, there are lots of ways. I usually have, and now I actually stop to think about, wait a minute, what do I actually do? The truth is, for much of the time, I have a jar feeder on top of the nuke. So the answer is yes, you do have to keep feeding a lot, unless you're very confident that you've got a strong nectar flow.
Well,
and of course, it also depends, you know, what your goal is for that nuke. If you're just trying to get it through and not let it, you know, build up too much, maybe you don't want to feed it a whole lot. If you're just trying to get it ready for winter, you might feed it going into winter and then call it good.
well, we'd like to open it up. Does anybody else have any questions? This is the time to ask.
Maybe I have another comment. John, you mentioned there's some good YouTube videos, and there really are. The one thing I would recommend is when you're viewing one, particularly on something like nukes or swarm control, figure out where that person is and what the time of year they're trying to do that, what they're describing. Something works very well in Alberta may not work very well in Oregon.
I couldn't agree more, and thanks for bringing that up, because, you know, there's this term that I've heard thrown around quite a lot called fall nukes. I didn't bring it up earlier, but I'll bring it up now. I've heard people talking about fall nukes for ages, and you know, I've always thought, what are they talking about? When I make up a nuke in the fall, it nearly always fails. I mean, who does fall nukes? Well, there are people that can do that. They might be in Tennessee or Florida or somewhere, but in our neck of the woods, you might be doing a split in late June or early July, so that it's a good strong nuke in the fall. But you know, you're not going to have much luck, or at least I've not had much luck doing late nukes up in the Willamette Valley. But in other regions, and you're absolutely right, you can see this on the YouTubes, people doing things that simply won't work here. There's one guy out of University of Guelph who I thought has got a nice summary on nuke splits, and I think he's worth looking at, since they're a more northerly climate.
Paul Kelly. Kelly.
Yeah.
Well, Susie mentions that she appreciates you talking about trauma to the colony after doing that, because she's not really heard it, and I haven't either. But it is relevant.
I think so. I would say, you know, I was sort of thinking of the going back to the surgery. You know, surgery is trauma. You know, there's always trauma, you know, to the body, whatever it is, and yeah, it is traumatic. Yeah, and it takes time to get over that. But they do, you know, they do, unless you really screw it up. But even if you screw it up, if you work hard, you can still fix a lot of problems if you do it early enough.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you like that you have some queen breeders that you really like, and after you mentioned it, it makes sense that if you want to introduce some good genetics into a nuke or a split, that would maybe you would want to introduce a queen. So, could you tell us who some of your favorite queen breeders are?
Well, these aren't necessarily people that I buy from, but I have a lot of respect for, and you might not be able to get queens from them directly either. I'm almost hesitant to mention names, but I'll mention some that, anyone that's doing it on scale is probably doing a pretty good job, and there are small people that are doing a good job. So I'm nervous, but I think one example of a guy that I don't buy his queens very much, but I have huge respect for him, is Pat Highcomb. Highcomb queens, fantastic. Oliveira's bees, they do a lot. There's some Hawaiian queen breeders. Who else can I think of? There's a couple in Oregon. I've used this year. I've used John Jacobs' Old Soul Caucasian queens. This is part of my program to add genetic diversity to my bee yard. I'm adding some Caucasians, and I really like them. They did very, very well. That doesn't mean they're going to be, as I said, every year they're not necessarily good. You might find that one, for example, and I really hate to name names, but the queens I got from Old Soul this year did very well for me, very, very well. They might not necessarily have done every single year.
But that in itself, that point is an excellent point, I think, because, right, everybody has a bad year, especially when you're dealing with any kind of livestock.
Yeah.
But so Eric asked, what are some signs of bees and trauma after a split? And then Ryan asks, when do queens start to become available?
Okay, the trauma, since I sort of made that word up because I was on the surgical analogy, I guess I would say, what you typically, well, it depends. Sometimes when you do a split, everything sort of goes quiet for a day or so after the split. And that might be as much to do with the weather as anything. But I would say maybe if you don't see a lot of activity, maybe that's partly because you didn't get enough foragers over there. So it's kind of difficult to read, but I think it's fair to assume that they've gone through some sort of trauma. They've gone through some disruption. Things aren't as normal. One of the things that they have to do is that their foragers have to go out and reorient. That means that there's probably less feed coming in that day, and I don't know how many days after that, but they've got to go and find food again from their new orientation, which is partly why you've got to feed. So I don't know if I could point to a specific behavior, except, as I said, sometimes you see them sort of shut down for a day or so, and then they start emerging.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
This is kind of a follow-up to that question is, and I don't know, it was hard to read the slides on my small screen here, but when you make a split, is there any kind of proximity that you want to have for that split? Because the foragers are likely going to go back to their parent hive, correct?
Yeah, so actually, yeah, let me see. So I'll talk about that. So what I did, if you notice, I didn't talk about it, but in the splits, I showed often the source hive being reversed after you've done the split. So what you're trying to, there's an assumption that's not always correct. For example, in the walkaway split, the assumption, you have no idea what's going on, but there's sort of a broad assumption that the split colony is the weaker. The split colony has only got a few brood frames in, maybe doesn't have a queen, or maybe you put a new queen in there, it's weaker. So it needs the most post-traumatic, support. So if you have the split colony facing the same orientation as, if it's, say you have no choice but to put it right next to the source hive, then if you're forced to do that, then what you want to do is reverse your source hive so that it's not facing the same orientation as it was. And the foragers that have come out that day will return, and the only entrance they'll find is the split colony. So they'll tend to go into the split colony. And so you tend to recover more of your foragers that way. It's not going to work for all of them, but it helps. But yeah, so ideally, you'd want to put these things about 2 miles away, but how many of us can do that? I can do that. Actually, I've got colonies 100 miles away, but it's not often that I do a split and then run off with that split and, install it 100 miles away. I tend not to. I tend to do what most beekeepers do, which is some sort of reversing or at least reorientation. So it's not on the same orientation. The other trick you can do is put obstacles, change the landscape a bit right in front of the hive so it looks different, and that will tend to sort of encourage orientation as well.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see, I'm just trying to read through these.
Yeah, Ryan has a question. So I have you right up to speed here. And basically, he wants to know if your earlier graphic was from Dave Cushman's website. And then he wanted to know if treating for Varroa in accordance with making the splits, it seems that like if allowing a colony to requeen itself, treating with OAV while the colony is broodless would be helpful. And I think that's accurate.
Oh yeah, you want to do with OAV. Well, you can do it when it's got brood in. You're just not going to get as much benefit. So let's see. Let me read this question again. Oh, I see. I see your point. So would you? Okay. Would you do a treatment in a split colony while it's still broodless? Is that the thrust of the question?
Looks like it.
Yeah. I'm not sure I would actually, because I tend to be conservative. And, while that colony is sort of in this sort of transition state, I would tend to stay away from doing anything else that's putting stress on that colony. That's just me. And that's why I tend to focus on doing a treatment reasonably close to doing the split, but not during the split period or the split recovery period. But that, that doesn't mean I'm right. That's just my risk appetite. Yeah, okay, so Laurie's asking about putting branches in front. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, you can do anything like that. Yeah, exactly. Just Laurie's saying just get a branch and with leaves on it and stick it in front of the hive. Great idea. You can stick bales of straw in front, anything to sort of, and even actually, that's a good point. Change the entrance, narrow it down, or at least change the profile of the entrance. If you have an entrance reducer on, flip it so that the bees are forced to the opposite end of the entrance that they were before. And for how many days? Yeah, for a few days. Yep. Ryan's asking, is it beneficial to allow the foragers to return to a queen-right hive to improve acceptance of a new split? So I'm not sure, are you asking, is this split hive now queen-right, or are you saying that they're going back to the source hive? Ryan. Yes, okay, so Ryan's saying that, well, he's read that, and this is right, that nurse bees are more accepting of a newly installed queen. Yes, but you still need foragers. So that is one thing I didn't mention here, that what you might want to do is, after you've done your split, shake in, it's a good idea to shake in more bees, because as you become depleted of bees, as your nurse bees become foragers, you can shake in some more nurse bees into that split hive. And so you do that off the brood combs, of course. And when you're doing the emulating the swarm split, shake lots of bees in there. You really want to empty the source hive as much as you can, which will reduce its swarm impulse. Okay.
Well, John, thank you very much. That was quite an enlightening lecture. I feel like that I might be able to get a few of my nukes to survive this year, my splits, maybe not have the swarms that I've been having, which is
Okay.
the goal.
All right. Well,
And
thanks for listening. It's a huge topic, and I feel, it's tough to cover it. This is normally something I think it would be like a 3-hour class or something, followed by a field class. We'll be doing some classes this year. I'm hoping as soon as I get my shots, I'm going to start. we'll start doing field classes again. We can do some splits. We'll do a new class.
great. We're all waiting for the shot.
Yeah.
Call your county health department and tell them your criterion to see if you're in 1A, and that includes people who are 65 and older with comorbidities, which include hypertension, diabetes, obesity, or immune suppression. That includes cancer or a raft of other things, or if you're a healthcare worker. So there's your 1A status. And if you call
Okay.
your county health department,
Is that 1H or 1A?
that is 1A as an alpha.
Okay.
And they will let you know when you can get it. And hopefully the governor is getting that wrapped up and getting it more organized. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
All right. And if anyone has any further questions, feel free to, either email me or text me or call me or whatever. My phone was on that first slide. It's a big topic and it's easy to skip over a lot of stuff. And I know I slammed through a lot here. So.
Well, you hit the high points. So
Yeah.
it feels like I got what I needed.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Good
Thanks
night.
a lot. See you. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Unless you have any final questions or comments.
Good night. Stay safe.
Good night. Please, 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 if you care about whether we Zoom or we meet in person, make sure you go to the to that URL and fill out that 1-question survey so that we can have some data to support our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Mhm.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.